So let's hear it for Ireland Woods and Savannah Eden. Thank you. So this year we are riding the tide of impermanence as we go through all of these changes. And this month our focus has been on creativity. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Things are created, preserved, and destroyed. So what better way to celebrate creativity and creation than with the celebration of Mother's Day and motherhood? Because there's nothing more precious than a baby. A baby is filled with potential and hope for the future, and we can see infinite possibilities waiting to develop in them and be expressed in the world. A new human has arrived. New life has arrived. And that's what we're also celebrating here today. And what I would like to do is to look at the similarities between the creative process and having a child, because they're actually very similar. Eddie Van Halen said, there are really three parts to the creative process. First, there is inspiration, then there is the execution, and finally, there is release. Conception, gestation, and birth. Birth, childhood, and adulthood. So there's this process of being inspired and creating and then letting it go. And that is the same process that we go through with birth and with having children. You have them, and then they grow and they leave the world, just as your creative project should. Your creative project should be created and then given to the world to bless it. Charles Fillmore said that mother love is the closest to divine love. What that means to me is that it's unconditional and that there's a willingness to sacrifice your life for another being. Motherhood calls for us to surrender the body, our time, our minds, our life energy, our money, you name it. Everything you got, they'll take it. And it's also an opportunity for a spiritual awakening as well as a heart-opening experience. I think my mom's favorite quote was, motherhood is having your heart outside your body. And that's what our children become to us. It's our hearts walking around outside of our bodies. And I know that for me, the birth of Jordan and Caroline, my heart opened in a way that it never had before. And I was a pretty sincere spiritual seeker before my kids were born, and it didn't even come close to the experience that I had once they arrived. And what I also learned for me was that when my heart opened, it wasn't limited to just my kids. It was limited to all kids. In fact, it also included all animals. Now I see animals, and they're like, oh, they're all my kids too. So there's a great surrender that is asked of us when we take on the responsibility of parenthood. And it calls for the surrender, not only of all these other things I've said, but the surrender of the ego. And the truth is, if you think about the creative process, it's the same, right? It calls for you to surrender your ego so that you can create something. Once you become a parent, it's no longer about you. And I know that narcissistic mothers can do a lot of damage because they haven't allowed their child to be the child. We're supposed to be that base for them. Audrey Niffinger said, in fairy tales, it's always the children who have the fine adventures. The mothers have to stay at home and wait for the children to fly in the window, because they're off on their adventures, are they not? And so in some ways, we're called to be the frame around our kids so that they can grow and flourish. And I know that this is the gift that my mother gave to me. You know, she gave me a lot of freedom, and she kind of let me follow my dreams. And she wasn't kind of a Pollyannish, like, you can do it, Karen. It was more like, stop talking about it and just go do it, would you? Just shut up and go do it. But I always felt supported in that way, and I never thought that there wasn't anything that I couldn't do, because, you know, if you get your mom's permission to do it, well, of course you can do it, right? Gibran said it beautifully in his poem on children when he said, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. And they come through you, but they're not from you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, because life does not go backward, but forward. You are the bows. I love that image. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. And the archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might that his arrows might go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. So we're called as mothers, we're called as fathers, we're called as uncles and aunts and parents to hold our children and to create that frame so that they can fly. So parenthood requires letting go and eventually releasing your child into their own destiny. And your creative projects are the same. So I think I've shared with you that Jerry Schley and I have been taking a memoir class over at the UW. And this semester has been about publishing. And no one in class is even close to publishing, let alone even thinking about publishing. And yet the teacher is pushing us and bringing in authors who are published and describing the whole process, because she said, if your work isn't to be put out, then what was the point? You know, why are you doing this? Why are you creating this? And even though you might not be ready for that, she wants us to begin to think about it. Otherwise, it's like you have a kid and then you lock them up in the basement and you never let them out, right? I mean, you got to let your creative projects out in the same way. So yesterday, we had an author who came and spoke with us. Her name was Kirsten Jarvis Adams, and she wrote a book called The Chicken Who Saved Us, The Chicken Who Saved Us. And she has a son who has a very rare illness, and he had spent 2 years in the hospital. And she told her husband, I need the money to either go for therapy or I need to go to the UW and take a writing class. Take your choice. What would you like me to do? He says, go to the UW, take a writing class. So, so she wrote this story, and basically, I haven't read it, but basically it's about her son who connects with this pet chicken. And the chicken helps to transform the whole family, the love of this chicken, between the chicken and this boy. And so she got it published, she got it out there, and she said, you know, my purpose in writing the book was, for one, to get that story down and out so that it was out of me and it was no longer being held in me. But secondly, because if there's only one person that this book can help, then I've done what I've needed to do. So she has a Facebook page as an author, and she got IM'd by a woman who said, my daughter just got diagnosed with the same illness as your son. Can you talk to me? So she called her, and for some reason, I don't know why it was so late, but it was midnight Seattle time. This woman's on the East Coast. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. She's alone in the hospital room with her sick daughter, and she's talking to Kirsten in Seattle, and she said, I just read your book, and is this my life now? Is this my future? Is this what I'm going to be living? And so the author said she sat and she listened to her, and then she started to give her contacts, because she's done a lot of work around this particular illness, and some advice. And they talked for quite a while, and then she hung up. And she said she went and woke her husband up. It's the middle of the night. And she woke her husband up, and she said, this is the reason I wrote the book. This is the reason I wrote the book. Even if it's just for this one woman, this is why I wrote the book, that I knew that someone else needed to hear my story. So whatever your creative project is, whether it's your child or something that you're working on, recognize that it needs to go out into the world, not for ego's sake, right? Because again, what's mother love that Charles Fillmore said? Mother love is unconditional. It is egoless. It is just being an instrument, if you will, and surrendering all of that over to spirit. So I was watching a video on Netflix called The Creative Brain by David Engelman. And one of the things that he said about creativity, and it fits again with motherhood, childhood, parenthood, is that we have this conception, this idea, if you will, of creativity, that we create stuff out of nothing, that we just like, boom, I'm just creating something out of nothing. And nothing could be farther from the truth. What creativity is taking something that already exists and then mixing it up so that something else comes out of it. So it's taking disparaging ideas or different things, and then you create something new. It's not creating out of a void. Engelman said, creativity doesn't mean inventing something out of nothing. Instead, it's about refashioning what already exists. And is life not that way? You didn't just pop out of nowhere, did you? I mean, you did. Your spirit and soul probably did. But our bodies were not just they were created out of our parents and out of our grandparents and our great-grandparents, and we carry their DNA, and we carry all that have gone before us. We carry that within us as we come into this life. And so it is with creativity. We come in, we create through what already exists, and then we make something else of it. So an example is jazz, right? Robert Glasper is a jazz musician, and he's been bringing in hip-hop and different kinds of music into it, and people are saying, you can't bring hip-hop into jazz. And he's like, yes, you can. You can bring anything into jazz that you want to, because that is what jazz is. He said, jazz is a mutt. It's a music that's made up from other music. He said when it birthed, it was boogie-woogie and classical and blues and gospel, and all those things were infiltrated into jazz because it was a reflection of the times. So it wasn't created out of nothing. It was created out of what already is. There's an architect in Denmark. He creates these crazy-looking buildings, and I think he's currently working on a building in New York, the Trade Center 2 or something, I think he's working on. But when we were in Denmark a couple of years ago, there's this weird building that's just outside of Copenhagen, and it's a ski slope. So you're going to ski down this building, but it's also a power plant. I mean, who puts a power plant and a ski slope together in the same thing? This guy does. And again, it's this amazing thing. And he said, creativity is often in the combination of creativity happens in the combination of seemingly mutual exclusive ideas. And if you find a way to combine them, then you get a third entity that combines aspects of both that don't seem to come together, but actually it's the synergy of the two. So we have the power to imagine the world that isn't our world yet. That is creativity. So it's translated from Danish, so it's a little combobulated there. But what are people? What are humans? What is all life? It's a combination of all that went before, right? You're a combination of everything, of all your ancestors that went before. A dog is a combination of her doggy parents and all of life, yes? So there's a combination of our expression of parenthood and birthing and creativity that really all kind of comes together. And this talk is an example of that, because I took creativity and motherhood and thought, okay, how can we make one thing out of it? I don't know. So how can we be more creative and be a better parent, right? And I think that the same rules apply that apply to creativity. So here's an example. The author of the film about the brain said that the thing that can block creativity, not a shocker, is laziness. Says the brain will pick the easiest route, so the known route, rather than learn something new. It's like, yeah, I already know that. So, I mean, we can see it here, right? How we all sit in the same places every Sunday, right? It's like, too much work to go to the other side of the room. No. So the brain will go to the easiest route, and yet that is one of the blockers to creativity. So one of the ways that we can engage creativity is by trying something new. And boy, what's newer than having a child? So those of you who have had children, remember before you had the kids, people would say to you, boy, is your life going to change? And you'd say, oh, yeah, I know. No, you don't know. You have no idea how your life is going to change. And so just by the mere fact of becoming a parent and bringing a child into your life, it just, boom, it just changes everything. And so there's this burst of creativity that can happen. So we try something new. So that's one of the ways that we can push creativity. It's also by pushing boundaries that we already have. And then the third is not to be afraid to fail. And that's a big one because none of us likes to fail. Why? Because it feels horrible, doesn't it? It feels absolutely awful. And there's no guarantees in raising children or being creative that we're not going to fail. And yet, that's how we also become creative. So you can be the best mother and the best father in the universe. Guess what? I bet you made some mistakes, right? I bet you failed in some way or other. Because we can look at our own parents and see how they did it, right? It's like easy, like, hey, you did this, this, and that. D.B. Weiss, he's the co-creator of Game of Thrones, writer. He's amazing. And he said that he feels like, he said, if you take the year that I started Game of Thrones and the year I graduated from college, and then you add up all those years, that's how many years I was a failure. He said, I was a writer, and I was not a very good writer. But I kept doing it, and I kept doing it, and I kept doing it. And all of that failure, and he said it was an awful feeling, but I stayed with it until Game of Thrones came to be or came together. And he said even now he'll write a script and he'll think it's brilliant, and then he'll look at it and go, who wrote that? That is horrible. I did, you know. And I told you that I've been trying like comedy and doing different things, and I got to tell you, it's a stretch, and it's not fun to fail, you know. It's not fun to bomb. But the more you do those things that you don't know how to do is the more that you step out and create. So whether it's parenthood, whether it's the creative process, we're all moving in that direction. So we're celebrating the nurturing energy. We're celebrating creativity and creation. We're celebrating all of those wonderful qualities of mother love, which is unconditional, which is that supportive, loving energy. And so, Jeannie, we have so many mothers in this church, so many people who have held the mothering energy. And I want to call out Jeannie Strawn today because this is for you. So Jeannie has been feeding us for, what, 25 years? Mm-hmm. Yes. And yes. So Jeannie has brought that nurturing, mothering energy into this community. She has been providing the brunches for us, the light suppers. So I know that one of your missions, if you will, is to create community. Yes. And to create community through food, yes, through eating, through connecting. And what is more mothering than that? But more than that, Jeannie is a mom and a grandma and a great-grandma?
No,
not yet. Okay. And she holds that energy as well. So she's a great listener. She's always there, and she's a great listener, and she holds that energy. So today, she's hosting our last brunch here, our Mother's Day brunch. We invite you to stay for that. Is there anything you want to say? I have to get you a mic.
Just thank you for letting me be with you.
So as we go forward, let's do it with open hearts. Let's do it with the the surrendering of the ego to nurture one another, to bring that mothering, loving energy, not just to children, but to our partners and our friends and our neighbors and our coworkers. Because mother love is as close to God love, according to Charles Fillmore, and we have that opportunity to be that blessing. So, whether you're a mother or not, whether you're a guy or a woman, happy Mother's Day.